I typed the email subject line twice, because my hands shook, then I pressed send and felt the room tilt. My truth went to everyone's CD on the illusion that fed us. My body knew the cost before my mind caught up. Heat climbed my neck like an alarm. The cursor blinked back like a metronome for dread. Daniel Ward said, "We can resolve this privately," but the word privately was a leash I had worn for years. I stared at the door and heard my pulse knock on the hinges. Jonah Reed said, "I am with you," and the words landed like a raft in hurricane chop. I remembered the hallway where I learned to smile instead of speak. The old rule thrummed, be agreeable or be alone. Dr. Lena Park said, "Name what you did and what you won't do again," and the sentence felt like a handrail appearing mid-air. I tasted metal behind my teeth and kept breathing anyway. I had sent proof of a rigged process dressed as policy. The silence around me wasn't safety, it was scaffolding. The bargain was simple: be useful, stay small. The crack widened because I finally refused the price. Morning arrived like a verdict stamped without appeal. I watched the inbox turn from unread to blazing, and each subject line felt like a hand at my collar. Daniel Ward said, "You misunderstood intent," and the word intent tried to file the sharp edges off harm. I remembered the first week on the job, when praise came with a boundary that no one named. Jonah Reed said, "You told the truth in daylight, and I realized how long I had worked by moonlight rules." The policy I exposed wasn't a rumor, it was a turnstile counting who got grace. Dr. Lena Park said, "Track your body's evidence," and my stomach answered before my logic did. I felt small and exact at once, like a wick catching. My younger self pressed against the glass of now, asking if I would pick her this time. The key on my desk glinted. The ring lay heavy, and the envelope weighted like a dare. Cost no longer lived in theory. It lived in who would stay when I stopped shrinking. The meeting invite hit my calendar with a chime that pretended to be polite. The subject read clarification, which is what you call control when it wears a smile. Daniel Ward said, "Let's align expectations," and the word align meant bend. I printed the documents, the notes and the dates, and the stapler sounded like a gavel. Jonah Reed said, "You won't be in that room alone," and I believed him enough to stand straighter. My palms sweated like they were washing away permission. Dr. Lena Park said, "Name your line before you enter," and I wrote one sentence on an index card. The hallway to the conference room felt longer than maps allow. The ring on my desk stayed behind, a small circle of rehearsed compliance. I touched the key in my pocket and remembered doors I never tried. My younger self whispered, "Don't trade me again." I said, "Not this time," and my voice didn't apologize for existing. The conference room had glass walls, so accountability could watch itself look busy. Daniel Ward said, "We're all on the same team," and the word team did not include whoever asked questions. I placed copies in a neat fan, and each sheet reflected a face I had learned to comfort. The policy language sat like a locked door with the key taped underneath. Jonah Reed said, "Start with the timeline," and the dates made a pattern no one could politely ignore. My chest shook without moving. I felt the childhood rule tug, be safe by being agreeable, but it frayed like old thread. I said, "The process advantaged your favorites," and the air thinned enough to show the scaffolding. Daniel's smile cracked at the corners where truth fit. I kept speaking with the steadiness of a bridge under weight. The silence that followed wasn't approval. It was an ending coming true in real time. After I walked to the stairwell where air tasted like metal and cleaning solution. My hands trembled in a rhythm I recognized from every time I stayed quiet. The difference now was that I didn't. Jonah Reed said, "You were clear," and clarity felt heavier than fear but kinder. A message from the smiling gate lit my phone, "Proud of your courage. Maybe wait on next steps," and the soft daggers arrived on schedule. I thought of my mother's kitchen voice teaching me peace as performance. Dr. Lena Park said, "Notice who asks you to shrink and call it love." I let the sentence land where apologies used to live. The index card in my pocket was warm like proof of life. I said, "I won't recant," and the word "won't" clicked like a lock turning. The bargain had lost its shine under bright light. The cost had moved into the open, and I was done renting myself to pay it. I sat on my childhood bed, the quilt still smelling faintly of detergent and dust, and wondered how many lies stitched themselves into this fabric. My mother said harmony keeps the family whole, and I remembered how silence was sold as glue. Jonah Reed said, "They kept you small to keep themselves safe," and the words stung because they carried no malice, only fact. I looked at the photo frames on the dresser, each smile rehearsed, each posture careful. Dr. Lena Park said, "The wound begins where the rule feels like love," and my throat tightened because I recognized the math. The rule was simple: don't need more than what's offered. I felt my younger self pressing against the closet door, asking for air. I whispered, "I see you now," and my voice cracked in the room that taught me to lower it. The cost of pretending safe was written on every wall, and the ink finally bled through. The lie that kept me alive was dressed as kindness. My father said, "We're proud of you when you help," and help became a leash I polished until it gleamed. At school, I volunteered for every task because the applause was safer than questions. Jonah Reed said, "You confuse usefulness with worth," and the floor under me shifted because he was right. I carried that lie into every workplace, every friendship, every romance, as if being indispensable guaranteed belonging. Dr. Lena Park said, "Notice when praise feels like oxygen," and my chest collapsed because I had been starving for decades. I realized my want was simple: approval at any cost. But what I needed was harder: to breathe without an audience. I sat in the quiet, waiting for panic, and instead felt the faint pulse of possibility. The lie had protected me once, but now it kept me caged. The mask was polished over years until it gleamed so brightly, even I forgot what lay beneath. At work, Daniel Ward said, "You're reliable," and reliable was a synonym for silent. In friendships, I smiled through exhaustion, offering laughter as a decoy. Jonah Reed said, "You think being easy to love means you're loved," and I swallowed the sentence like medicine that burns. My mask was obedience cut into the shape of generosity. Dr. Lena Park said, "Masks keep us safe until they smother," and I wondered how long I had been gasping without knowing. I wore competence like armor, and warmth like camouflage. My want was to be chosen, my need was to stop auditioning. I touched my face in the mirror and whispered, "I'm not just a role." The mask didn't shatter, but it slipped enough to glimpse skin beneath. What I chased was always moving: a title, an invitation, a nod across a crowded table. Each achievement promised rest, yet delivered only another rung. Daniel Ward said, "We'll revisit promotions next quarter," and quarter became code for never. I worked late, polishing reports, chasing a phantom applause. Jonah Reed said, "You confuse milestones with home," and the sentence cut because my calendar was full and my soul empty. I wanted arrival, but I was always in transit. Dr. Lena Park said, "The want is approval, the need is authorship," and the words sat heavy, like a key in my palm. My younger self whispered, "Stop running and stand still with me," and I felt a tear carve down my cheek. The chase had given me status, but not substance. I wanted the world's nod, but I needed my own. The need was the most terrifying because it stripped me bare. To stop performing meant risking rejection so sharp it might split bone. My mother's voice echoed, "Keep the peace," and peace sounded like erasure. Jonah Reed said, "Freedom costs closeness sometimes," and I trembled because closeness had been my currency. Dr. Lena Park said, "You don't have to earn air," and my lungs filled like I had been underwater for years. My younger self asked only to be picked first, not last. I whispered, "I choose you," and for the first time, I felt the rule fail in my favor. The ritual of shrinking cracked, the mask loosened, the lie bent. The anchor frayed, but in that unraveling was the start of release. I realized the need wasn't to hold harmony but to honor honesty, even if the world turned away. The email from HR arrived like a blade wrapped in courtesy. It invited me to clarify context, which meant justify truth until it resembled silence. Daniel Ward said, "It's standard review," and my gut twisted because the word standard always meant power hiding. Jonah Reed said, "Don't let them rename your honesty," and I clung to it like rope in floodwater. I printed policies with trembling fingers, every page a contradiction to their story. Dr. Lena Park said, "Every gate will test your boundary," and I pressed the key motif between my palms. My younger self whispered, "Don't erase me again," and I swore out loud, "Not this time." The wound hummed with memory. The lie begged for revival. But my need was louder, and the cost of silence already collected enough of me. The conference call glitched, but every clipped syllable still carried weight. The policy face clerk said, "Please confirm your compliance," and the word compliance snapped like a trap. I read the document aloud, my voice shaking but steadying with each line. Jonah Reed said, "You sound more solid than they do," and warmth spread like armor across my ribs. The institution had no face, only a voice, but it echoed with decades of tradition, dressed as necessity. Dr. Lena Park said, "They depend on your shame," and I gritted my teeth through the static. The letter on my desk seemed to glare, proof that the rule was older than me. My younger self tugged at my sleeve, reminding me that obedience never bought safety. I closed the laptop with trembling hands and said, "This rule dies here." I walked past the break room, where laughter echoed like proof I was still an outsider. The smiling gate said, "You're so brave, maybe tone down the timing," and my jaw clenched at the varnish on betrayal. Jonah Reed said, "That's not support, that's sabotage," and I wanted to believe him. Daniel Ward shook hands with visitors, smiling as if no storm rattled the windows. The community whispered behind me, approval conditional on my silence. My younger self's voice sharpened, "They win when you shrink." Dr. Lena Park said, "Notice who calls your truth inconvenient," and I did. The hallway smelled of burnt coffee and old paint, and my chest carried the weight of both belonging and exile. The ring motif in my pocket burned like a circle I was finally stepping out of. The family dinner was quieter than memory allowed. Plates clinked, but words carried sharp edges. My mother said, "Can't you let things go?" And letting go sounded like erasing myself again. My sibling Adrian Ellis said, "You don't remember it right," and resentment flared across the table. Jonah Reed squeezed my hand under the wood, grounding me with silence. Dr. Lena Park's earlier voice echoed, "Backstory is a wound, not an alibi," and I swallowed hard. The portraits on the wall seemed to lean, witnesses with selective memory. My younger self sat at my side, whispering, "Tell them what it cost me." I said, "I carried the silence so we could pretend safe," and the words cut through the meal like broken glass. Late that night, I opened the drawer with letters I had never mailed. Each page carried words too sharp for past silence. The comfort seller had once told me, "Laughter will heal more than honesty," but laughter had only delayed fractures. Jonah Reed said, "Write it as if no one will stop you," and I did. My hand cramped, ink smudged, but sentences rose like truth finally unbound. Dr. Lena Park said, "The page remembers what the body fears," and my chest loosened with every line. My younger self leaned close, whispering, "Keep going," and I promised I would. One letter read like confession, another like refusal, all of them like release. The motif of the key sat on the desk beside them, waiting to unlock more than paper. The morning after, I reread the letters and felt the ground shift under my feet. What I thought was survival now looked like surrender. Daniel Ward said, "We shielded you, but the shield had always been a leash." Jonah Reed said, "They weren't protecting you. They were protecting themselves," and the air cracked with clarity. My chest pulsed with the truth I never wanted. I authored the myth that trapped me. Dr. Lena Park said, "Sometimes the cage is self-built," and I wanted to argue but couldn't. The pages on the desk no longer felt like weight, they felt like mirrors. My younger self whispered, "You see me now," and for the first time I believed it. The twist was not that I had been betrayed, but that I betrayed myself each time I rehearsed silence. In the office lobby, the marble floor reflected a story I no longer fit. Daniel Ward said, "We gave you opportunity," but his words were bricks built on my silence. I realized the favor had always been theirs, not mine. Jonah Reed said, "Opportunity isn't ownership," and my breath caught at the sharpness of it. The twist pierced through. Every compliment was a currency. Every kindness, a transaction. Dr. Lena Park said, "Look again at what was framed as love," and the frame cracked in my memory. My younger self whispered, "They never chose you, they chose your compliance," and the sting spread across my ribs. The glass doors in front of me looked less like welcome and more like a cage polished to gleam. That evening, I returned to my old journals, pages that once felt like sanctuary. Between the lines I found the twist. The words I wrote to survive were the very bars that bound me. I had trained myself to sound grateful for crumbs, rehearsing loyalty to a mask. Jonah Reed said, "You wrote your silence as scripture," and shame flushed my face because it was true. Dr. Lena Park said, "Naming the myth is breaking it," and I underlined the phrase with shaking hands. My younger self whispered, "Stop editing me out," and I tore a page free, letting the fibers snap. The twist wasn't just in them, it lived in me, in the bargains I upheld long after the threat passed. At the family gathering, the silence broke before dessert. Adrian Ellis said, "You rewrite history," and the accusation carried its own myth. I answered, "I lived the part you didn't watch," and the words startled even me. My mother said, "We only wanted peace," but peace had been a code for erasure. Jonah Reed pressed my knee under the table, steadying me. The twist spread. Their protection wasn't for me, it was for the story they needed to tell themselves. Dr. Lena Park's words echoed, the protector was protecting themselves, and my skin tingled with recognition. My younger self whispered, "You're not alone in this room anymore," and my spine straightened as though rooted. The tablecloth shifted like a stage curtain, and the truth refused to fold back. Walking home, the night air felt sharper, colder, but alive. Streetlights buzzed like nervous witnesses. I whispered, "I was never broken, only bent," and the words startled the air into stillness. Jonah Reed said, "You finally sound like yourself," and my chest expanded with something I hadn't felt in years. Space. The twist closed its circle. The flaw they named in me was survival skill, sharpened against a hostile edge. Dr. Lena Park said competence in the wrong context is labeled defect, and my footsteps struck the pavement like a drum beat of defiance. My younger self whispered, "You chose me," and I answered, "Always." The decision loomed, no longer what happened, but who am I if I accept this? The night hummed with the weight of choosing. The summons came in bold letters, "Final review meeting." The words looked less like invitation and more like sentence. Daniel Ward said, "Let's keep this civil," and civility felt like a trap disguised as courtesy. I steadied my breath in the elevator mirror, rehearsing not what to say, but what not to surrender. Jonah Reed said, "Your silence is what they count on," and the reminder anchored me. Dr. Lena Park's voice echoed, "Decide the self you can live with," and my chest clenched around the truth. My younger self whispered, "Don't trade me again," and I pressed the index card with my boundary sentence written in dark ink. When the doors opened, I walked into the room not as their helper but as my own witness. The climax began before a word left my lips. The table gleamed like an altar to appearances. Daniel Ward said, "We're giving you a chance to reconsider," and reconsider was code for retreat. My hand shook, but I placed the documents flat, my voice a low strike. "The process favored your circle." The silence rang louder than denial. Jonah Reed's eyes caught mine, steadying me across the polished surface. My younger self whispered, "Choose me now," and I felt her pulse inside my chest. Dr. Lena Park said, "The bargain must cost something visible," and I knew this choice would strip me of approval. Daniel leaned back, smile thinning into crack, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. Integrity cost me belonging, but it gave me air I could finally breathe. The smiling gate texted mid-meeting, proud of your strength, but maybe wait. I felt the sugar sting of false allyship. Jonah Reed said, that's poison wrapped in praise, and my chest steadied because I finally believed him. Daniel Ward said, we could resolve this quietly. But quietly was the currency that kept me chained. My younger self pressed close, whispering, don't disappear me, and I held the card tighter. Dr. Lena Park had told me once, a single sentence can close a contract forever, and I spoke it. I will not recant. The air shifted, cold, unwelcoming, final. The climax sharpened. Approval slipped through my fingers, but it no longer felt like loss. It felt like release. The silence after my sentence was jagged, like glass underfoot. Daniel Ward said, you'll regret this, but the threat felt smaller than the years I'd already lost. Jonah Reed's voice, quiet but firm, she told the truth, cracked the atmosphere. My younger self whispered, we're, and for once I wasn't apologizing for her. Dr. Lena Park's reminder echoed, integrity is the event, and I felt the weight shift inside me. Approval drained from the room, but space replaced it. My hands no longer trembled. They rested steady on the table. The cost was clear. I would not be welcomed back into the circle I once fought to enter. And yet the door I closed locked behind me with a finality I could bear. I stepped out of the building, air raw against my skin, and felt both emptied and remade. The bargain I had lived collapsed behind me, but in the rubble was something like breath. Jonah Reed said, there's no going back now, and his words carried neither warning nor pity, only truth. My younger self whispered finally, and I smiled through tears that didn't ask permission. Dr. Lena Park's counsel repeated, the old contract ends when you refuse to renew, and I knew I had signed nothing that day except myself back into being. The climax was not applause, not victory, but clarity. The choice cost me belonging in their eyes, but gave me belonging in mine. I whispered aloud, I will live with me, and the city seemed to nod in quiet accord. Morning felt larger because I wasn't bracing for apology. I turned off email notifications and my phone went quiet like a lake after rain. Jonah Reed said, what's today's rule? And I answered, no rehearsals, only truth. I brewed coffee without checking who might need me first. The key on the counter didn't mean escape anymore. It meant choice. I retired the ritual of drafting fixes that kept others comfortable. Dr. Lena Park said, build a room that fits you, and I rearranged the apartment until my breath had corners. I practiced saying my name at full volume, and didn't tuck the last syllable. Adrian Ellis texted, still mad, still here, and it felt honest enough to stand. I recycled the ring-shaped lanyard I used to wear like a leash. My chest unclenched in slow increments, a new ordinary forming by honest inches. At the community center desk, I corrected my file where my name had been misspelled for years. Clerk said, did no one fix this? And I smiled without apology. I said, it's Maya, say it with me, and the syllables landed like a stake in ground. I finally claimed. The policy face glanced up, surprised, then careful, then respectful. Jonah Reed said, look how the room changes when you do, and the air actually did. I asked for the process in writing, not favors in whispers. The form felt less like a test, and more like a tool when I held it steady. Dr. Lena Park said, you're teaching them your standard, and the sentence warmed my spine. I signed with my full name, no shrinking, no initials. The old practice of translating myself for speed fell away like a bad coat. I met my mother at the park bench she liked because it faced the pond. She said, I didn't know how to do better, and it sounded less like defense and more like weather. I answered, I won't carry what isn't mine, and the sentence settled between us like a boundary with soft edges. Adrian Ellis said, I remember a different house, and I said, tell me yours. I'll keep mine. The chorus of ducks was unruly, which felt right. Jonah Reed waited across the path, not intervening, only witnessing. Dr. Lena Park had warned, if there is repair, it must be conditional, and I named my conditions without heat. My mother nodded once, slow and real. We didn't hug to erase the past. We stood up knowing the story now had room for more than one truth. Back home, I boxed trophies that once proved I deserved a seat. I kept the letter opener shaped like a key, but only as a reminder of doors I choose. I deleted the calendar alerts that made me sprint toward praise. Jonah Reed said, "What stays?" And I answered, "What I can live with on silent days." I cooked dinner without checking texts that used to summon me like an ambulance. The apartment felt quieter and more legible. Dr. Lena Park said, "Resolve the motif with intention," and I placed the ring-bound notebook in the trash. Adrian Ellis sent a picture of the pond at sunset with no caption, which was enough. The habit of narrating my worth evaporated by degrees. I wasn't performing belonging. I was building it. On the rooftop, the city breathed in even strokes, and I matched it. I no longer checked who might be upset by my boundary. I said my name once quietly, and it felt like a vow without witnesses. Jonah Reed said, "What are you afraid of losing now?" And I realized the answer wasn't everything. It was nothing. The thing I was ashamed to want, being chosen without audition, felt ordinary at last. Dr. Lena Park said, "Let the dust settle honestly," and it had. Adrian Ellis texted, "Next time, I'll start sooner," and the thread felt like a bridge with weight limits. I kept the key, gave away the ring, and mailed one letter I needed to send. The new ordinary wasn't bigger, it was truer. The quiet clicked into place like a door that finally fits its frame. The office elevator doors closed behind me for the last time, and I didn't look back. My chest was light, not because the cost was small, but because it was fully paid. Jonah Reed said, "You're walking out taller," and the sentence hummed in my ribs. Daniel Ward's voice lingered in memory. "You'll regret this." But regret never arrived. I whispered, "I regret every time I stayed," and the echo felt like justice. The glass walls that once magnified my silence now reflected my refusal. My younger self whispered, "You chose me," and her voice no longer carried panic, only rest. The bargain was dust, the mask discarded. The first act had cracked me open, this one sealed me whole. At a cafe table, I sat without rushing, no laptop open, no performance required. The barista asked, "Name for the order," and I answered, "Maya," clear and unshaken. No one flinched at the sound, and that was the miracle. Jonah Reed said, "Feels different now." And I smiled because it wasn't difference, it was truth finally unhidden. The ring of my name carried more weight than any title I'd chased. I stirred sugar slowly, a small ritual that belonged only to me. Dr. Lena Park once said, "You'll know freedom when ordinary things stop asking for disguise," and she was right. My younger self sat across in imagination, sipping quietly, no longer begging to be chosen. I met Adrian Ellis by the Riverwalk, where we had once shouted as kids. He said, "I didn't see it like you did," and I answered, "Both can be true." His shoulders dropped as if a long-held defense finally lowered. Jonah Reed leaned on the railing, giving us space but listening close. My younger self whispered, "Don't erase me this time," and I didn't. I said, "What I lived mattered," and Adrian nodded, not fully agreeing, but no longer denying. Dr. Lena Park's teaching echoed, "Specificity softens blame," and I let details replace accusation. The river's current carried away the weight we didn't need. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was recognition, and that was enough. At home, I cleared the last box of old reports and shredded them without ceremony. The sound wasn't destruction, it was release. Jonah Reed said, "Feels lighter," and I laughed because it did. I kept one letter, proof that I could tell the truth in my own hand, and slid it into a drawer. The key lay beside it, not as burden but as reminder. My younger self whispered, "I trust you now," and the words brought a quiet I hadn't known before. Dr. Lena Park had promised, "Resolution is not erasure, it's choosing what remains," and she was right. The apartment no longer felt borrowed. It was mine, measured by breath and honesty, not performance. On the rooftop at night, the skyline shimmered like a map of choices I no longer feared. I whispered, "I will not audition for my own life," and the vow wrapped itself around my bones. Jonah Reed said nothing because nothing needed saying. My younger self, quiet now, rested in my chest like a heartbeat steady and sure. The city hummed, not as adversary, but as witness. The final blow was not thunderous. It was one sentence that lived outside the story, one sentence that closed the circle. I am mine. The silence after was the kind that doesn't ache. It was the kind that stays.